Welcome everyone to today's COPD Awareness Month webinar, Capturing the Patient and Caregiver Perspective in Research. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Gretchen McCreary, and I am the Director of Research at the COPD Foundation. I have been with the Foundation for almost 7 years and work on the Patient-Powered Research Network, which is dedicated to empowering the patient voice and making sure they are central to the research process. We are going to present to you today some of the COPD Foundation's work to elevate the patient and caregiver perspective in research to ensure that their voice is prioritized, that it is heard, and that it is valued in the creation and implementation of research studies. Before we get started, please note that you are muted. You can ask questions through the question tab within your window. We will respond directly as we're able during the event, and will provide you with our contact information at the end of this event for any additional questions that are not addressed today. With us today, I would like to introduce Mary Ellen Houlihan, who is a patient investigator and a governing board member of the COPD Patient-Powered Research Network. Mary Ellen is a key contributor and brings the patient perspective to today's discussion, and she has been integral to the work of the Foundation. Her experience working on research teams by bringing her unique patient perspective has elevated everything she's done here. Next, we have Kathy Carlamagno, Managing Editor of the Journal of the COPD Foundation and contributor to our Bridge project. She has been a medical communicator for almost 3 decades and works daily with researchers and authors of critical COPD research. Next, we have Cara Pasquale, the Vice President of the COPD Foundation's Digital Health and Therapeutics Accelerator Network. She has experience working directly with patient investigators on research teams and integrating the patient and caregiver perspective into all phases of research. She has been with the Foundation for over 7 years. The work we are presenting today is from the COPD Foundation's Bridge project, which stands for Bridging the Gap Between Patients, Caregivers, and COPD Research. The Bridge project, which was funded by the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, or PCORI, was undertaken to increase the patient and caregiver voice and engagement in research by developing resources for both the research community as well as patients and caregivers. The result was the development of the Bridge Patient to Investigator training and a patient caregiver prioritized COPD research agenda. We are going to tell you about each of these resources and how they can assist towards increasing the patient and caregiver voice in research. The patient and caregiver voice has always been top priority at the COPD Foundation, and we wanted to just take that mission to the next level as we wanted to enhance that voice in all research endeavors. Our goal was to create the first patient-driven research agenda as COPD is becoming a more highly researched condition. Engaging patients and caregivers through all stages of research can advance patient-centered outcomes and drive research to reflect the issues important to the people living with the disease. Oftentimes, research is conducted without the patient voice at the table. In the development of previous research agendas, that significant patient-caregiver input was not included. We really wanted to fill this gap and create a truly patient-centered research agenda with direct patient and caregiver input. As we mentioned earlier, we applied for funding through PCORI. The following outlines the process that we took. We used qualitative, open-ended survey responses from the PPRN question, what research in COPD matters most to you? We then mapped these responses to 6 domains to develop 25 research topics. The research topics were categorized by these domains: family, social, community research, well-being, biomedical therapies, curative research, policy concerns, and holistic research. Our patient and caregivers were stakeholders on the project and reviewed these topics. We then invited the greater COPD community to participate in a crowdsource event on COPD 360 Social, the Foundation's internal social media site, with more than 52,000 members, the majority of these members being individuals with COPD, followed by healthcare providers and caregivers to prioritize the 25 topics through voting. We now have a prioritized research agenda, which you can view on the Foundation's website. We are now focused on widespread dissemination and encourage all of our collaborators to review these priorities. We are now going to speak with Kathy, Kara, and Mary Ellen to get their perspective on this agenda and what it means for the COPD community. Kathy, as someone who works with researchers every day, why is it important that researchers and funders pay attention to this agenda?
Research that leads to treatments or interventions that make a real difference in patients' lives is a critical goal, particularly for a chronic disease like COPD. And we think the first step in creating research that matters to patients is to ask them, what matters to you? Which is exactly what we did. So the new COPD research agenda shows us what is important to people living with COPD and their caregivers. They told us they wanted research to focus on improving their ability to be independent and active. They wanted research that would lead to better treatments for symptoms like shortness of breath, and ultimately research focused on finding a cure. Our community also told us they wanted more research on the treatment of exacerbations and research on mental health concerns. Many of the patients and caregivers gave us suggestions for research that addresses overall well-being, which of course highlights the importance of quality of life, overall physical functioning, and happiness of the individual. This is different from most research done today, which is typically focused on biomedical interventions, chronic and acute care, as well as care coordination. It's important for funders and researchers to give these priorities that have been shared with us by the COPD community careful consideration and try to better align their efforts to these patient priorities.
Thank you so much for those insights, Kathy. Mary Ellen, could you please tell us how you got involved with this project?
Thanks, Gretchen. I have become very limited in where I can go and what I can do as a result of my COPD. COVID has just made it that much worse. I had been a patient investigator on the COPD Invest study and learned firsthand how a patient's point of view can shape COPD research. I enjoyed the work and was able to do everything online from my home. So when Kara approached me with the opportunity to participate on the Bridge project, I was excited to contribute in any way I could. The Bridge project was focusing on developing materials and methods to enable patients to become more involved in research and make sure their voices are heard. I felt I could offer a perspective from my previous experience that would make it easier for other patients and caregivers to participate as investigators in the future.
Thanks so much for that, Mary Ellen. Your perspective was definitely valued on this project. But further, as someone with COPD, why is this agenda important to you?
The agenda is important to me because it helps researchers have a clear understanding of what is important to the COPD community. And by community, I mean those of us living with COPD, as well as our families and caregivers. My hope is that researchers and those funding COPD research will align their research with the patient priorities detailed in the agenda.
I hope so too. Thanks so much, Mary Ellen. Kara, as a member of the COPD Foundation, what are the plans for the Foundation to implement this agenda and make it a reality?
Thanks, Gretchen. Happy to answer that question. So this agenda is now the blueprint for the COPD Foundation for the research we will support and conduct ourselves. We are strongly advocating that for anyone involved in conducting or funding research to reference this agenda to make sure that the research they are planning to conduct addresses one of the items on this agenda. The foundation is already supporting research addressing these items to identify better treatments and increase mobility and independence.
Thank you all. I appreciate you providing your points of view on this. Because of time, we need to move the discussion forward, but please type any questions you may have into the chat feature, and we will make sure to provide responses after the webinar. I am going to now turn it over to Kara, the Vice President of the COPD Foundation's Digital Health and Therapeutics Accelerator Network, to present the Patient to Investigator training, the next resource that was created as part of the Bridge project.
Thank you, Gretchen. It is my pleasure today to introduce the Bridge Patient to Investigator training and why its creation is so important. Since the inception of the COPD Foundation, we have been advocating for the inclusion of people with COPD and caregivers on research teams working directly with researchers. Patients and caregivers have a unique perspective that those without the disease or who care for people directly with the disease do not have. So it is really important that their perspective be included throughout all phases of research, supporting better designed studies, successful recruitment, and interpretation of results from the patient perspective. While the concept of including patients and caregivers directly on research teams is accepted in theory, putting it into practice can be a challenge. Often, researchers or companies that fund these studies may not know how to implement or skip critical steps we believe are necessary for the patient and caregiver inclusion, such as during the process of designing the actual study. As a result, the COPD Foundation created the Bridge Patient to Investigator training to support patients and caregivers who want to work on research teams, and also support researchers and funders who want to include patients and caregivers, but are not sure where to find individuals who want to do this work or how best to integrate them into their own teams. The Foundation is in the process of building a strong group of trained, confident patient and caregiver investigators through our Bridge training program. So how did we create this training? We first started by reviewing existing materials and trainings. The process illuminated for us that the current materials did not address our specific COPD-related needs. The majority of these trainings were in person and did not account for the mobility limitations of our community. Once we identified the gaps in existing materials, we then worked with several stakeholders, including patients, caregivers, researchers, and clinicians, to develop this training, which took over a year and a half to create. The process included developing an outline and draft content that was then tested by patients, caregivers, clinicians, and researchers. We then used their critical feedback to finalize the overall training. The training provides fundamental research information and is focused on building the confidence of our patients and caregivers who want to be contributing members of research teams. The training is self-paced, online, and comprised of several different modules that you can see on the right side of the screen. These modules range from what it means to be a patient and caregiver investigator, to types of research, to types of study documents, and to an optional overview of statistical analysis. One critical element of this training is focused on showing what a patient or caregiver can contribute at each step in the research process. We are now going to speak with Kathy, Gretchen, and Mary Ellen to get their perspectives. Each of these individuals played an integral part in creating this training. Gretchen, as someone who is implementing this training, what can a patient or caregiver who may be considering taking the training expect?
Well, this is an 11-module training, and we expect each module will probably take between 30 minutes to 2 hours. Luckily, there is no time frame for completion, and it's set up to be completed at your own pace. Once you complete the patient to investigator training, you will then join a cohort of other patients and caregivers through the COPD Foundation, where we will keep you up to date on research opportunities. You may not be put to work immediately, but you will be advised of opportunities to participate on a research team when opportunities arise. Individuals who complete the training will be invited to join an organized group with the Foundation and will be informed about upcoming research team opportunities.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. Mary Ellen, from your perspective, why is this training so important?
Confident patients and caregivers who are not afraid to speak up are needed to make a real impact on research. Research teams work at a fast pace, and the discussions that ensue can be intimidating and full of jargon that may be unfamiliar. Understanding the basics of research is essential to avoid being overwhelmed. When joining a research team, a patient or caregiver may not understand everyone's role or what the team expects from them, or how they can contribute at each step of the process. They may wonder if their observations are relevant and worth bringing up. Knowledge builds confidence. When developing the Bridge Patient to Investigator training, we try to address each of these concerns and provide support for patients and caregivers wishing to make a difference by becoming investigators.
Thank you so much, Mary Ellen. You have a lot of experience in this area, and I just want to acknowledge how important you were to the creation of this comprehensive training. We definitely could not have done it without you. Kathy, how can companies utilize this training for their own purposes?
Well, we know that pharmaceutical companies and others who conduct research want to include the patient caregiver perspective in their research efforts. And we believe that the Bridge training program can help create a group of trained potential patient caregiver investigators who will be willing and able to join research teams. Whenever a pharmaceutical company, medical device company, or really anyone conducting research is planning a study, they can contact the foundation and we will find the appropriately trained patient or caregiver who is ready and willing to serve on their research teams. But we're also pleased to offer companies and groups the opportunity to use our training program with their already recruited patient and caregiver partners. This training program will be beneficial to any patient or caregiver recruited to join a research team, either as a refresher course or just to build their confidence prior to participating. We do ask that any companies who want to utilize this training to please contact the COPD Foundation first.
Thank you, Kathy. Gretchen, as someone who works with patient and caregiver investigators at the Foundation, why is the patient caregiver perspective on research teams needed?
First of all, patients and caregivers have the lived experience that others on the research teams might not have. We have seen this multiple times working on past studies. They have the opportunity to impact the way research is conducted by sharing this experience and knowledge with the disease and the impact it has had on their lives. Next, it's really important to remind researchers of the mobility and other limitations COPD patients face on a daily basis. It is important that the burden being placed on someone in a study is understood and may be limited. Patients and caregivers being involved in designing the study can identify these issues that the other members of the research team might not be aware of. It is also important to have patients and caregivers read all of the materials which will be seen by patients in a study to ensure that they are clear and simple. Finally, I think that patients and caregivers can often help researchers do a better job of recruiting individuals to participate in their studies. They can speak directly to what would motivate or interest a patient or caregiver in participating in a particular study, and also what may not motivate them. Patients and caregivers can provide invaluable insight into recruitment efforts as well as messaging.
Thank you so much, Gretchen, and thank you all for providing your perspective and your work on creating this training. The training will be available on the COPD Foundation's website by the end of the year for the broader public. Interested patients or caregivers who would like to complete this training can contact us by emailing bridge@copdfoundation.org, and following a brief intake process, we will help them get started. If you are a researcher, company, funder who wants to utilize this training or needs support in working with patients and caregivers, please feel free to reach out as well through the bridge@copdfoundation.org email, as we have several patient caregiver investigators ready to serve on research teams. Additionally, if you have any questions that we have not answered today, please contact us through the Bridge email. Thank you again for joining us today to learn more about the Foundation's work. As this is COPD Awareness Month, we want to draw your attention to our Lace Up for Lungs campaign. This campaign highlights the need for better breathing and lung health, exercise and activity, and quality of life and caring for those impacted by COPD. Your participation can help others learn about COPD and the ongoing need for research, education, support, and ultimately a cure for COPD, bronchiectasis, and non-tuberculosis microbacterial lung disease. Please go to copdfoundation.org to learn how you can become involved. Thank you all again for joining us today, and please do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.